any set of written instructions that's being delivered to someone, the first thing you do is explain what those written instructions mean. It's the automatic next step. It's negligence if you hand someone instructions and then don't work it through them so that they can understand what it means, and then they keep the written instruction as the written reminder, but they keep the oral mental understanding, the unpacking, as how to do it. And it's almost impossible to exist without that double component.
There's a great cartoon I saw once of a guy standing by his fridge and is leaning right over like this in absolute pain. And he's holding a carton of milk, and his wife comes in and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "It says on the top, pull out and bend back." Hi everyone, Jason here from Spiritualbabies.net. This is another episode of the Haftarah Halfhour. You're joined again by Rabbi Joshua Neely, who joins us every week and walks us through the Haftarah portion. So thanks for coming back, Rabbi Neely. It's really awesome to see you every week and to have a chance to talk through these.
Oh, I enjoy it greatly.
This week we're looking for the Haftarah of Bamidbar, which is the first book in the Book of Numbers.
The Book of Numbers, Bamidbar, is often called or referred to as being the Book of Counting in other rabbinic sources. But obviously the main focus is that this is the experience of the people Bamidbar, in the wilderness of Sinai, picking up where we left off. That is to say, after the events of Sinai and after the events of the inauguration and establishment of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle.
And this Torah portion, can you tell us a little bit about it? It's kind of centered around counting and censuses.
Yeah, it's not by mistake that this is called the Book of Numbers, because the very first Torah portion is absolutely about the census taking. So because, as I said, this moment of the Torah story is the next stage of our journey, that we had gone from Egypt to Mount Sinai. We've now been there a couple of years. Now it's time to move on. And the moving on at this stage in the story is towards the land of Israel, which means the people have to organize themselves for the coming battle. And this is a census for war, for establishing who is, how many draftable people there are. And I know we're not going to get into it, but I'll refer at least a year or two ago from my own Torah class. We talked about the numbers that are mentioned here and literalism versus non-literalism in the figures, and so it's very worth studying the traditional sources on this. But it is the numbers and the countability or non-countability of the people that is going to give us our first link to the Haftarah right off the bat.
Right. So if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be a little question mark in the top right hand side of the screen now, and if you click that, that'll take you to that video. Okay, so we are reading the Haftarah for Bamidbar, which is Isaiah 2:1 through 22. The number of the people of Israel shall be like that of the sands of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. And instead of being told, "You are not my people," they shall be called the children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel shall assemble together and appoint one head over them, and they shall rise from the ground. For marvelous shall be the day of Jezreel. O call your brothers my people, and your sisters lovingly accepted. So the biggest question I have there is, who is Jezreel?
Well, Jezreel is an area of Israel in the northern kingdom, and it is sort of trying to do this with hand gestures while looking in the webcam backwards. If you can picture the little dip for Haifa, and you can picture the Sea of Galilee inland, the area sort of in between them is known as the Jezreel Valley, and it's one of the most beautiful and fertile areas of the land of Israel. Probably should point out right off the bat that naming is very important throughout the entire book of Hosea. So this is part of his poetic style, is to reference names back and forth, and we're going to go into the names a little bit later on as well. So Hosea was in a rather unique relationship. That is to say, God told him to marry a woman that would be unfaithful to him. And he had these children that he named rather unflattering names regarding their parentage. And that became a parallel for his understanding of the relationship between the people of Israel and God. That at one and the same time, we were both the children of God as well as the offspring of idolatry. And that confused relationship needed to be clarified. And what Hosea is saying here is that we will be brought back to God the same way that his own children should be brought to him. And there's a beautiful midrash, I believe it's, let me just check my notes, hold on. Psachim 87b in the Talmud, that talks about God rebuking Hosea, that Hosea is being very harsh, as we'll see later on in the Haftarah, against the people of Israel and saying that God has rejected them and that God is, pushing them away. But God says to him, but look, don't you understand and don't you experience the same way? Don't you have some empathy? You have children that you don't even know if they're yours, and yet you still love them and want them to be yours. All the more so, I, who know these people are mine, should want them to return to me and should want them to be my people, should be the children of the living God, rather than this ambiguous statement, ambiguous state of rejection. And so he really tries to use the experience and the feeling that Hosea should have for his own children, where there was some doubt, as a way of clarifying God's relationship with the people of Israel, where there is no doubt from God's point of view. It's just we who introduce the doubt to the relationship. And that's what we're aiming for, is transforming the relationship from one of infidelity to one of truth, faithfulness.
I get the impression, and I know where this is going to go before I even start, that this, although a prophecy for Israel is a messianic text.
This one is definitely messianic. And we know that for a couple of reasons. One, it never took place in the time of Hosea's Israel. They did not heed his call. I mean, clearly he wanted them to reject the idols and to turn, but it never really manifested. But two, what he's predicting in verse 2 is that the northern and southern kingdoms will unite. And that's something that has not occurred in its truest form yet. And we know then it's therefore a messianic prophecy.
Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. And let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts. Else I will strip her naked, I will leave her as on the day she was born. I will make her like a wilderness, render her like desert land, and let her die of thirst. I will also disown her children, for they are now a harlot's brood, in that their mother has played the harlot. She that conceived them has acted shamelessly, because she thought, I will go after my lovers, who supply my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. This is an analogy, right? It's an allegory. It's not actually a physical woman here.
Your impression is absolutely right. Although Hosea himself lived the experience of having an unfaithful wife. And that's why the metaphor probably came so readily to mind. This is a metaphor, in his words, between Israel and God. And what God is warning is that Israel has been terribly unfaithful. And even the English is not quite as strong. The word harlot sounds almost tame in modern parlance, but it was certainly not tame in the ears of the first people listening to this, or for most of our history. And the idea that the woman is just going after all of these lovers because they have bought her affection through their gifts and what she thinks she owes them. And it's that fallacy that is going to intrude most strongly in verse 10, as God points out that unlike human infidelity, where a person may be able to receive gifts from one person that were not given by the legitimate spouse, everything in the world comes from God. And that's what makes her harlotry even more idiotic in the eyes of God.
Assuredly, I will hedge up her roads with thorns. I will raise walls against her. She shall not find her paths. Pursue her lovers as she will. She shall not overtake them. and seek them as she may, she shall never find them. Then she will say, I will return to my first husband, for then I fared better than now. So it feels that God's going to step in and cause all of her efforts to come to nothing. So she'll be forced to remember that she was better off with her first love.
Well, this is the great ambiguity, and it's why this section of Hosea is really a little unclear for the first time you read through it. Is this really talking about repentance, or is this talking about coercion? Because what God is describing here is that I will not let her whore after all of these other idols. I will make it so that she suffers. And then when she suffers, she'll do a comparative analysis and say, you know, when I was faithful to God, my life was better than when I was trying to sleep around. And so because of that relative status, I will go back to when I was better. That doesn't seem to be the true essence of what we hope for when a person returns to God. The person shouldn't be doing it because they are calculating the risk-benefit analysis, but because they are recognizing the rightness of their relationship with God. And that's really what's going to be driven home throughout the rest of the Haftarah, that it's not just about what are you getting from this, what's your payoff, but how right is it to be doing what you're doing, or how wrong in the case that's going on.
And she did not consider this. It was I who bestowed on her the new grain, the wine and oil, I who lavished silver on her and gold, which they used for Baal. Assuredly, I will take back my new grain in its time, and my new wine in its season. I will snatch away my wool and my linen that served to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her shame in the very sight of her lovers, and none shall save her from me. And I will end all her rejoicing, her festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths, all her festive seasons. So again, jumping in, but are we talking about pagan versions of these things? I mean, if she's keeping these, then no, isn't that the problem that she wasn't?
Yes and yes. The idea here that she was probably keeping pagan holidays and rituals is definitely there. But Israel did have a history of also keeping, I don't want to use the word faith, but keeping a relationship open with God through God's festivals as well. Certainly the festivals with their rejoicing and their feasting are the easiest of the commandments to get excited about keeping. But really what we see here is exactly the divided loyalty that makes the metaphor of adultery so powerful. Right? We're not talking about a woman who, in the metaphor, had divorced her husband and now was with a new husband. We're talking about, again, in the metaphor, a woman who is sleeping with her husband and sleeping with other people. And that's the adulterous nature of this relationship. That Israel had not 100% completely, fully rejected God as God. They just wanted an open relationship and wanted to experience other faiths as well, while simultaneously keeping some of the festivals and commandments, the ones they thought were nice. And that's what makes it even more painful. You know, for the woman to run away is hard. For the woman to sleep around and then come home and share the bed is even more painful.
I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, which she thinks are a fee. She received them from lovers. I will turn them to brushwood. The beast.
Can I encourage a slightly different reading of that?
Yeah, sure.
So I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, which she thinks are a fee she received from her lovers. Right? She thinks she got her vines and her fig trees from her lovers, meaning these other gods. You know, all of the ancient pagan gods, they're the ones who gave her the fruit and gave her the vines. They're the ones who supported her through all of their idolatrous help. And she just completely misses the point that the idols did nothing. It's like someone mugging the husband, taking his wallet, buying a gift, and then showing up at the door to offer it to his wife. Like, it was bought with his money. It's not a real gift from the mugger.
That's a great analogy. Thus will I punish her for the days of the, now I've got of the Baalim, or of the Baalim.
Yes.
I want to say that that's multiple gods.
Well, I don't know if you want to go into this right now or get into it when we get down to verse 18 and 19. But right now, calling it gods is probably a good phrase. Baal and Baalim were the sort of generic names for many of the Canaanite and other foreign gods. But there's a specific issue with that word that's going to come out in verse 18.
Okay. On which she brought them offerings. When decked with earrings and jewels, she would go after her lovers, forgetting me, declares the Lord.
So what makes this section very shocking to both our tradition as well as to most readers is, if you still remember verses 1 and 2 and 3, we started off with everything being wonderful. You're going to be as numerous as the grains of sand on the sea. You're going to be wonderful, and you'll be my people, and I'm going to change your name to something, that is the children of the living God. And then we delve into this horrible, horrible rebuke of the unfaithfulness of Israel. If Israel's been this unfaithful, and if God is going to punish Israel for its unfaithfulness this badly, what were the first verses about? And our tradition says the first verses were about the fact that, unlike a human husband, or unlike a human king who might feel betrayed by his people by their traitorous behavior, God is always willing to forgive, that God is always willing to reconcile. And it was precisely because of the grisly nature of this warning that God wanted to remind us at the beginning that in the end we would return, in the end we would be accepted, despite, and then the litany begins. So that it was important before the rebuke began to remind people the rebuke is not here just because God is trying to say he's forever angry, but because God is trying to say, I'm angry because of this, but I want you back so we can be like we should be, which is what verse 16 is going to pick up on.
From 16, assuredly, I will speak coaxingly to her, and lead her through the wilderness, and speak to her tenderly. I will give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a ploughland of hope. There she shall respond as in the days of her youth, when she came up from the land of Egypt. And in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me Ishi?
Ishi.
Ishi, okay. And no more will you call me Baali, for I will remove the names of the Baalim from her mouth, and they shall nevermore be mentioned by name. So there's a couple of verses that always jump out to me. Ezekiel 18 is one in some instances, and Jeremiah 31, and specifically the part that says that brother shall not have to teach brother, and everyone shall know the name of the Lord. And this kind of feels like everyone shall know the name of the Lord, because no one will need to know the names of any other fake gods.
That's a good take on it. But if we can do a little bit of Hebrew 101, in Hebrew, the word for husband, traditionally and certainly in this time period, is Baal, because Baal literally means master. And in the ancient world, the husband was the master of the house. And so the woman of a relationship in the ancient world would have absolutely called her husband Baali.
I'm just going to make a note here to my wife when she gets home. The Bible says.
And just like in English, where most of us don't use the word husband as anything like the verb to husband something. We just use it as the word we use. Certainly in modern Hebrew, most people that still use the term Baal to mean husband, it has no connection to the mastership that was there. But what Hosea is pointing out is that the relationship will be restored to such an extent that we won't even use this casual word Baal because it reminds us of the gods Baalim that we used to worship in our idolatrous phase. So it will completely change our language in order to avoid a word that is the same but with a very different meaning from our disgrace. And instead we'll use the word Ishi. Now Ishi just means my man, and is a more natural parallel to Ishti, which is the Hebrew word for my wife, which literally means my woman. So the idea of calling God Ishi is we will call God by a different form of a connector to husband that is more parallel to husband and wife. And in fact, many couples in Israel that seek to have a more egalitarian set of terms of endearment use the term Ishi and Ishti rather than Ishti and Ba'ali because of the inherent linguistic imbalance between those words. So Ishi just literally means my husband or my man.
That was awesome. Says a little free Hebrew lesson there, boys and girls.
Yeah, and you might have a hard time convincing the missus to call you master. So be careful with that.
Yeah, she'd call me many things, but not that. Okay, and 20. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. I will also banish bow, sword, and war from the land, and I will let them lie down in safety.
I was going to say, it's not just war, but the whole idea of the covenant with the animals is that we also won't be bothered or tormented by the animals either, that the world will be perfectly at peace, both from natural and human cause.
And is it fair to say that the days that's being spoken of here are a messianic age?
Certainly when you get into the words of that, yes. The idea of the reconciliation and being brought back can also equally refer to the restoration following the Babylonian exile. But when we're talking about this and the next few verses, generally they are considered to be pointing at the days of Mashiach.
And I will espouse you forever. I will espouse you with righteousness and justice, and with goodness and mercy. I will espouse you with faithfulness, and then you shall be devoted to the Lord.
We're definitely using the metaphor of husband and wife here. And by the way, the Erastich, Verastichli, I will espouse you, I will betroth you to me. This set of phrases are recited when we are putting on our tefillin. And when we are wrapping, in particular, the straps around the fingers. The three wraps that we do around the fingers are recited to each of these espousals that are mentioned here as a reminder of our connection to God. So it's kind of like a little mini engagement party every day when you put on tefillin. I think that it's a wonderful ending. Like I said, it's considered such a good end to a Haftarah that we recite it daily. Well, any day that we wear tefillin.
So there we go, boys and girls. That was this week's show. Thank you, Rabbi Neely, for giving your time and your expertise and your experience to us. We appreciate it very much. And
thank you very much, Jason, for making this all possible.
And you guys can find out what we're doing next week by hanging around to the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends. And if you have questions, you can leave them underneath, or you can find us on Facebook. And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.